Welcome to a special edition of The Partial Historians. Dr. G and I were lucky enough to catch up with teacher, author, classicist, and our Twitter friend, Dr. Rob Cromarty, to talk about his journey into the classics and one of the most tumultuous periods of ancient Rome, the long year, AD 69.
Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into classics and ancient history, things like that?
Yeah, sure. My name's Rob Cromarty and I'm a classics teacher based in the UK. And I got into classics, I suppose, in a kind of similar way to a lot of people. So I did a scholarship set of exams and I got to go to the local kind of grammar school kind of thing. And the only teacher I had any kind of a bond with there was my classics teacher, I called Tony Griffiths. Everybody else was, a little bit richer, a little bit better off. So I was kind of the outsider guy, and Tony kind of took me under his wing, and Latin and Greek were my thing. And then when I went to university, I kind of kept going with it, and my PhD was in Bronze Age archaeology, because at the university I went towards the more archaeological side. And then I finished my PhD at a really weird time in the year in the UK for going into postdocs. So I was looking to fill about 6 months and, accidentally fell into classics teacher, and 13 years later I'm still kind of doing it. So yeah, it's worked out all right.
Sounds not too bad, really.
Yeah, not too shabby.
And having that set of languages behind you is, obviously essential to be a classics teacher. And it's really interesting, I think, how the UK system is quite different from the system in Australia. For us, the private school system, which would be like the grammar school system, is mostly where students would learn classics. And the public system, which is by far the bulk of students, they don't tend to touch ancient languages at all. So both Fiona and I have ended up at university and we didn't have Greek or Latin. And then all of a sudden we're like, better learn some ancient languages.
I was going to say it's very strange because I also teach Latin every week over at the local maintained school as well. So that's really great fun, and we get to take them through GCSE Latin if nothing else. But it is really weird because there's a load of articles being published at the minute, and Edith Hall's doing a load of work over in the UK about trying to broaden the access. And I think there's been this perception that what we call classical civilization or ancient history is kind of almost like a second tier thing to the purity of Latin and Greek, and it's just rubbish. Because I know some really great Latin and Greek teachers who, frankly, don't know what happens in 1 year in the ancient world to the other, and couldn't tell you about anybody other than what this one soldier in Livy did when he was swimming across one river, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because we see the same sort of distinction made in Australia as well, where the languages are given primacy, but obviously if you're going to do history, you have to know something about methodology and historiography and how things actually came together. And all of that seems to be lost on the really pure classicists. So I think I'm really interested in seeing how it all comes together when we finally unify into one sort of super category. We'll see. Let's jump into the year 69. I'm very excited.
So let's do a little bit of a rundown, shall we, on what was the year 69 and why are we talking about it today, Dr. G?
So the year 69, it is a massive year in Roman history. Things go a little bit crazy. When we talk about the year 69, we're really talking about the back end of 68 as well. And a little bit of the first part of 70. So it kind of straddles a bit over a year.
It's the long year. And by that we mean multiple years.
But things start to go wrong with the demise of Nero.
Dr. G and I are very fond of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the first imperial dynasty to rule over Rome. But unfortunately at the time, the Romans weren't feeling the same way towards Nero because he'd gone a little bit weird. You know, he'd managed to alienate, well, pretty much everyone. And so he ends up finding himself in rather a difficult situation and has to commit suicide, which he also doesn't do very well.
Awkward.
Yeah. Nonetheless, Nero is dead. And once Nero is dead, because of the actions that he and Agrippina had taken throughout his reign, there ain't no Julio Claudians really left to take over. Which means that we have to find something else. But what will that something else be? Because nobody knows what to do without any Julio Claudians, Dr. G.
This is true.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your perspective, Rob, about what's going on in 69 and why you think it might be a significant year for the Romans.
For me, it's my favourite period. I mean, Augustus, yeah, I'll absolutely back Augustus on the hill of being an interesting guy. But for me, it's 69 when it's all of the work of the Principate kind of starts getting, as you said, unravelled, but also in a really interesting way, re-ravelled. You get this fantastic time where, I mean, Tacitus in the opening chapter of the Histories, he calls it, plagued with infamy, riddled with chaos, 4 emperors died, 3 civil wars, all of this kind of jazz. But for me, the most interesting thing about 69 is it's the point where the Roman world starts looking beyond the metropolitan centre. So up until this point, it's been so, Romocentric. It's been focused on the metropolitan urbanness of Rome. Whereas in 69, you've got to start looking outside the empire centre for where the dominant forces of political drive are coming from. And it's also that fact that so many things that have been kind of indicated under the Julio-Claudians, the passivity of the Senate, the fact that the mob have been politically disenfranchised, all of that is just seen in microcosm in 69, and it sets the tone for the next 30 to 40 years until you get, Trajan and Hadrian coming in with the second wave of kind of re-energizing the Senate. But it's just, for me, it's just fantastic watching what the Flavians and Vespasian in particular cherry pick from the Julio-Claudians to say, this has proven to be working, that's proved to be an absolute failure, so we'll take this, we won't go with that, and you get this streamlining of the Principate, and for me, that's why I really like it.
Well, definitely all could have come unstuck potentially, but as you say, it doesn't. Nero had obviously been dealing with some rebellions at the end of his reign because he was, the worst. Once he's forced to suicide, the guy that is attracting a lot of attention on the streets is a guy called Galba. Now, he's been around for a while. Most notably for me, he apparently, was Agrippina the Younger's radar for a while, and Agrippina got slapped for trying to, take off with him or something. But can you tell us a little bit about Galba and his background? Because he's just been around for ages, and yet not really in the center until now.
Yeah, I mean, Galba's an interesting one for me because, as you say, he's been perpetually on periphery. So he's been out as being governor of Spain for a number of years by this point. And even though he's only got 1 legion under his command at this point, at the end of 68, when Gaius Julius Vindex does his rebellion against Nero, one of that series of rebellions that you mentioned earlier, Galba jumps on this bandwagon. Galba sees an opportunity. And it's really interesting. If you read the Dio, you get the fact that Vindex gets all of these really powerful freedom-based speeches where he endorses Galba. And then Vindex rebellion basically comes to nothing at the Battle of Vesontio. So, at the Battle of Vesontio, Verginius Rufus, who's the commander of the legions of Upper Germany, defeats Vindex in what really is a really confusing battle where it just breaks out into a fight where nobody's really planning it. And the troops offer Verginius Rufus the emperorship, and he in this kind of staunch moment of Republican doer just says, no, it's not for me. But by this point, Galba's already started his march on Rome, so he's committed. So at that point, he can't turn back. And as you say, he's been this odd figure who has largely just now been cast as this old-fashioned, almost Republican style of governor, and his march to Rome is characterized, again, both Dio and Tacitus call it, drenched in blood. He is given this perception as a really brutal commander, but also an incredibly feeble old man who's in the sway of his terrible advisors. But the Senate back him. The Senate declare, at the end of his lifetime, the Senate declare in favour of Galba over Nero when they declare Nero an enemy of the state. And it's just remarkable to see that, again, this passivity of the Senate, where they just immediately weather vane over to the next most logical choice. But so that's a kind of a brief intro to Galba. There's this kind of, this odd man who comes from Spain with one legion gathering a second legion on his bloody march through to Rome. And by the time he arrives in Rome, the sources are really quite unified in saying any goodwill he did have has been utterly undone by what he's done on his march towards Rome and over that month period at the end of 68.
Yeah, and that's got to be saying something, because the Romans usually wet their pants for anybody who is, severe. And so for them to be saying, wow, this guy is severe.
Too severe.
Too severe. Like, that's got to be.
How severe does one have to be to fall into that category?
Wow, I imagine his face to just be like granite, like if you hit him with a poker, it'd just leave his profile. He is that severe.
It is an interesting turnaround for somebody, though, who has always been at this sort of periphery of the Principate. He has a connection in his background to Livia, and that's a long-standing sort of thing that's going on in the background.
Which is weird, by the way, because he was young and she was not. I'm just pointing that out there.
But it's there.
Yeah.
So he seems to have this understanding about sort of the way that the Julio-Claudians do business. And that's been an ongoing part of his career up until the point where he decides to just defect, essentially, and be like, it'll be me. I'm in for this rebellion. Nero's got to go. So there's something in the air about the way that Nero's career has unfolded that has meant that even people who have been around for an exceptionally long time, and Galba at this stage is in his early 70s.
Yeah.
So he's not fresh, at all. And this is a big decision to make when you're that old, I think, as well. Being like, you know what, I'm throwing in the towel against these guys and I'm going with something else.
Yeah, I mean, possibly the fact that he is so markedly different to Nero in the sense that, well, if they didn't like chalk, they must like cheese. But I like your point about the fact he says that he understands the way that the Julio-Claudians have done things. Because if you look at his coinage in particular, his coinage is really Julio-Claudian, almost Augustan in its style, where you get kind of Roma Rei Nascens on the reverse, you get the restoration of freedom on the reverse. So he's banging the drum for in the same way that Augustus was doing back in 28 with leges et iura pia restituit on the back of coins, where he's bringing back order, bringing back Romanness. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wonder where he thought this was going to go. I mean, even under the best circumstances, he can't live that much longer, can he?
That's the issue, though. I kind of feel like, as you've alluded to before, he seems to have significantly undermined any support that he had during his march on Rome, and he doesn't seem to really understand how his, lack of charisma or his just general personality is turning people off, and he seems to become fixated on the fact that, it's not that they don't like me for me, they don't like me because I don't have an heir. And I'm old, and so, But
it's also, he's missed one of the key things, I think, that is what the Principate has become, which is it's a military machine. Mm. And if the military isn't satisfied, you don't have any capacity to power inside that structure. And so his refusal to offer the donations to soldiers and things like that is immediately putting the people he needs offside.
Yeah, exactly. With that his famous remark of I'm not used to buying my troops, I levy them. Well, that's great. But for the last 60 odd years, we've been really handsomely bribed.
I would really like to be paid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Galba finds himself in this awkward situation where, he's managed to seize control, but for how long? And I find it really odd that a general is so off the mark with understanding, where his support comes from and how important it is to him. Do you have any insight on that? Like how a general could be so wrong?
I think on the first case, it's that he hasn't actually had that much experience of being a general. Over in Spain, he's done limited campaigns against the odd uppity tribe, but he's actually been really isolated out in Spain. You can see that when he marches back to Rome and he starts trying to gather all of the supporters from the other provinces, and famously the one that kind of attaches to his train is Otto, the governor of Lusitania. More on him later. But he's got that. I think there is this kind of touch of arrogance to Galba, which is underplayed in a lot of the sources, which want to try and present him as enfeebled, as, gullible. But I just don't think he realises that anybody else would have the Roman daring to do what he's done. He thinks, okay, I've rolled the die, and now it's there. It's mine for the taking, and of course everybody's going to follow me. He's got that traditional Roman arrogance in that way. So beyond that, I can't really see anything to account for, as you say, why he is so incredibly tunnel vision about this. It is remarkable. He just doesn't see, the writing on the wall going, well, if I've done this, well, who's stopping anybody else doing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because his taking over is seemingly, the end of the story in terms of, finally drawing back the curtain and everyone going, oh, it's the army behind the Principate. Now I see. Yeah. But nonetheless, because he does feel like maybe the big thing that will, finally win people back over to his side is maybe to have an heir, have some stability there. And so he starts looking around for someone, and as you've mentioned, there is this guy, Otho, who's out there, and he seems like a good choice. I mean, he also has a kind of connection to the Julio-Claudian dynasty with Nero and their kind of weird wife-sharing moment. But instead, he passes him over for someone who seems to be a bit of a nothing, this Piso character. Can you tell us a bit about this decision?
One of the most annoying names for any of my students ever, kind of Lucius Piso Licinianus Frugi, who by virtue of birth and adoption has connections to two really quite impressively backgrounded Roman families. So on the face of it, as a candidate, Piso, for the sake of it, I'll call him Piso, is not a bad choice. But ultimately, Galba picks somebody who is like him. Old-fashioned, a little bit out of touch, and frankly, if you look at the speeches that you get at the beginning of the histories from him, really quite boring and bland. So the choice is a sensible one, and again, it's quite an Augustan way of doing things with this formal adoption, the same way that Augustus had done for Tiberius in AD 4, Tiberius Germanicus, etc. So you can see what Galba is trying to do. He's trying to do things in the established way, building on that Julio-Claudian precedent. But again, he has underestimated the political ambition of those around him. Now, in a field where everybody is a potential candidate to be the successor, as soon as you pick one, you alienate all of the others. And possibly that's why he picked Piso in the first place, because Piso is connected, but he's also incredibly bland. He's almost inoffensively bland. So it's the sense that, in kind of like the same way that the Piso rebellion in 65 under Nero put a figurehead at the front of that rebellion who was, a generally acceptable candidate. Piso here is a generally acceptable candidate. But so I don't think it's not so much the choice of Piso that is the problem. It's the fact that he picks Piso over anybody else. Ultimately, I think anybody whom he had picked, with the possible exception of Otto, would have caused some form of civil disruption, some kind of furore. Because now, as much as he's trying to build on Julio-Claudian precedent, he's set a precedent himself in using violence and the military openly to secure political power, which is one of those key trends running through 69 as a whole.
Absolutely. So let's maybe talk a little bit about the man who would be king, which is Otho. So Otho, as we mentioned, has definitely been around on the scene, in that he was very close to Nero, and he seems to have been a bit like Nero. I don't know whether the sources are playing this up for effect, as, a contrast to Galba, or whether he was legitimately part of, Nero's, brat pack or something.
I think he was, yeah. And Otho sort of stands out in the literary tradition as being like the antithesis. It's like he's young and Galba's old. And it's like Otho's great with women. Galba hasn't seen a woman in years. All of these kinds of things. Otho is the unexpected good governor. Nobody's expecting him to do a good job when he's sent out, because he's got that reputation for being a playboy, for not really caring about stuff, but always being in part of the inner circle. And then they send him off, and all of a sudden he's making some good decisions, and people seem quite happy with the sorts of governing decisions that he's making on the outskirts. So he sort of builds a reputation for himself a little bit later in life, after getting off to a bit of a rocky start, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's really fair. And it's also interesting that he gets that reputation back again eventually. But as you say, when he's in Rome, both under Galba and in his own right, the sources are ridiculously harsh on him. We'll get onto it later on probably, but when it's like kind of, Tacitus is describing him as the Scylla to Vitellius's Charybdis, where they're just these two absolute terrible opposing forces. So yeah, Otto is a fantastic character for me. He's probably the most interesting figure of 69 as a whole, just in terms of the way in which his presentation by the sources is so varied.
And he seems to act quickly as well. When things don't work out for him, he comes up with a second plan very quickly. So we get this sort of narrative structure where he's following Galba along, hoping for the adoption, doesn't get it, immediately turns around and is like, all right, new plan. I'll be the princess.
Screw you,
stepdad. Take this, Galba.
That never was,
How about we do you in and I become the top guy? And that happens within the same day that Galba is murdered, Otto is pronounced imperator. It's intense.
Yeah, I mean, even more than that. So he adopts Piso Licinianus on the 10th of January. By the 16th of January, he's dead. They're both dead. So it unravels over like 5 days of ridiculous political unrest.
I always knew I had a reason to be nervous about my stepchildren. I now feel very uneasy.
I feel like this is the whole hallmark of Otto's sort of career, though, because it's like we don't have a lot of time with him in the saddle. He kind of gets in there early, and then by mid-April, it's done and dusted. It's over.
That's because I think this is where 69, I mean, 69 has a reputation for being incredibly confusing. And I think that this is where it starts to get really crazy, because while Otto and Galba have been having their differences at the beginning of January 69, Vitellius, this other character who we haven't mentioned at all so far, is already laying claim to be emperor off in Germania. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
I mean, I bloody love it. It is remarkable. So if somebody, I can't understand why nobody's made a film of 69. I know. The entire thing just builds itself around this fantastic cinematic narrative. You can imagine a narrator going, meanwhile in Germany, and it just cuts to Vitellius. So on the 3rd of January, the period of the 3rd to the 16th of January, intense of 69. On the 3rd of January, the legions of Germany don't swear loyalty to Galba in the traditional way. And the reason they don't do that is because 2 key lieutenants of the German legions, Valens and Caecina, have been rabble-rousing. And they've been rabble-rousing on the part of their guy, the commander of the legions of Germany, Vitellius. Now, Vitellius, again, is given a really short shrift by the sources. There's this brilliant bit which is Galba's actually appointed Vitellius to be the governor of Germany. And the reason he has done that is, to paraphrase, well, he's so much of a glutton, then he's clearly not a threat. All he cares about is having a good meal. As long as he's full, he's not going to be any trouble. And again, so you can see there that Galba's got that sense of arrogance about the appointment. But Vitellius, I think, is actually just, again, not himself particularly politically ambitious. It's his lieutenants who are advocating for him. And Valens and Caecina stir up the rebellions, the legions of Germany, to basically say, well, look, if the Spaniards can do this for Galba, why can't we do this for our commander and feather our own nest? They also kind of allude to the fact that Galba / Otto / that group are talking about transferring the legions from Germany, which at this point is a fairly cushy gig, out to somewhere far less salubrious. And so they are actually encouraging the military to feather their own nest, to say, look, if you want a good deal here, let's make our commander the emperor. So as you say, you've got these fantastically interconnected and yet parallel narratives running side by side at the beginning of 69, where you've got Galba trying to govern, Otto pissed off he's not governing, and Vitellius going, is there chicken in Rome? Okay, let's go to Rome then.
I hear the best meals are in the capital.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy how much you get on Vitellius's relationship to food in a year of incredibly intense civil war. But it does sort of come down potentially, I think, to the fact that rhetoric is always something we're battling with the sources. And do you kind of feel that the glutton character of Vitellius is emphasized to show that, well, if he can't control his appetites, is he a good character to rule?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely that, because on top of the gluttonous stuff, there's this just passage after passage in the Suetonius about how he constantly gives in to various types of appetite, be it food, sex, lust, greed for money, whatever it might be. He's basically characterized with all of those traditional hallmarks of a Roman not doing things very well. So the same things that were alluded against Catiline, that were alluded against any enemy of the state that you've had. I mean, you could if you change the name, it's basically a bit of Ciceronian invective against Vitellius. It's, he cannot do anything well, he does nothing in a Roman way, quote unquote.
Yeah. He's lacking moderatio.
Yeah.
That's the extent of the Latin you get.
My one Latin phrase.
Yeah.
All right, so we've now got Otto, who's obviously based in Rome, and we've got Vitellius closing in. How is this battle for power going to be decided? Is it going to be an all-out war?
Well, it starts off with a load of really quite frenzied letter writing, as only it can. You get the sense that nobody really knows what the hell is going on, least of all the Senate. So the Senate are vacillating one way or the other. Otto and Vitellius are sending furious letters to one another, at sometimes trying to bribe each other off, saying, well, let me be emperor and you could be my number 2/successor. When that doesn't work, you start getting allegations that they send assassins to kill one another. But the interesting thing from my perspective is a couple of chapters in Tacitus where he just describes how the rest of the Roman world falls. And he says, okay, these are the provinces that follow Vitellius. These are the ones that follow Otto. You can just see them kind of weighing up the options and going, well, which way are we going to go here? If I'm being honest, it's very much a kind of a cold war. Because realistically, this massive battle betwixt and between the Roman legions comes down to one single battle, the Battle of Bedriacum. And for me, it's more about the sense of you get these two forces of Vitellius coming down either side of the Alps, one commanded by Valens, one commanded by Caecina. You've got Otto sitting in Rome, furiously trying to levy whatever troops he can, because although he has got provinces that support him, there are the ones that are far away. So, for example, the Pannonian legions are favouring Otto, but it's going to take them too long to get here. So it's all about this sense of watching these narratives develop and seeing that realistically, neither one of these guys is presented as a good candidate for the emperorship. Like, as I said earlier, Tacitus calls them Scylla and Charybdis, and the Senate are trapped between the two of them trying to make this decision. What's more interesting is that you get things like the Acts of the Arval Brethren, who are recording the kind of the day-to-day religious services, and they are still doing things for both Vitellius and Otto, and you get names scratched out, so, well, actually, no, we just call him Caesar, because that keeps it really vague.
I'm always so impressed that Otto actually manages to, like, mint coins and stuff, even though he's only in charge for, like, a couple of months, essentially.
And also, if I recall rightly, both Otto and Vitellius are part of the Brethren. They sort of got their own factions within this priesthood, presumably, at this point.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that in January of 69, Vitellius's brother is the vice president of the Arval Brethren. So he features in pretty much everything. Going, on the 28th of May, let's have a feast. Vitellius is hosting. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it does come down in the end, though, to, you know, an actual fight, an actual battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the final denouement?
It's really odd. It is, again, one of the ways in which it's presented. You'd imagine this big set piece, glorious Roman battle in the best cinematic qualities of Quo Vadis. It just doesn't happen. Again, it ends up being almost an accidental outbreak of warfare where the Vitellian forces have managed to join up and the Athonian forces have headed north to meet them. And the outbreak of the battle, the way in which it's also presented, is it's kind of almost, it's inevitably going to happen, but it's not kind of right, we're going to go now. And even the outcome of the battle isn't that determining. So Otto's forces are defeated at the Battle of Bedriacum in early April of 69. But he's still got enough troops left to resist. The Pannonian legions are still on their way down, along with the Moesian legions, so he's got backup coming.
Yeah, he's still waiting for forces to join him. This could be good.
It could be good. You could get this kind of, big arm wrestle for the Roman world. But no, it's very, very interesting that Suetonius is a really good source on this. He presents Otto's moment of decision. And Otto decides, when news of the defeat at Bedriacum is brought to him, he weighs up the options and says, okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to kill myself so that the Roman world isn't yet further disrupted. And all of his aides de camp are turning around and saying, look, we can still fight on. We've still got troops. There's still hope. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. So he gets this moment of redemption, is how I talk about it with my students, where he's, having been presented throughout as, not really a great guy, at this moment of choice where he puts the Roman world ahead of his own well-being, he is given that sense of, this is what he was actually like. There was that inherent quality within him, in this kind of, almost an Obi-Wan self-sacrificing death, in the sense of...
It's so extraordinary.
And a huge tragedy, because if we're thinking about the way that these source materials are presenting this information, Otho is now the guy you want to win this war. And he's not going to. It's going to be left to Vitellius, the man who likes a good feast.
You know what? I'm starting to realize that the Romans they always want the person that they can't have. They always want the person who doesn't want power. They always want the person who's, going to commit suicide to be noble, but they can never have them.
It's ridiculous. It is really weird. And Suetonius is interesting on that, because Suetonius' father was one of Otto's supporters. He fought in Otto's campaigns with him. So you've got to kind of take it with a pinch of salt. How much is he just kind of taking Dad's word for it? It is remarkable, but you've also then got to put in the question, well, how much of that is revisionist history written with that kind of Flavian aftermath to say, well, look, if Vespasian's now going to enter the fray and be presented as the champion of liberty and the restorer of order, then Vitellius has got to be the bad guy. Therefore, Otto's got to be, an okay guy. So part of that Vespasianic call to arms is, look what Vitellius did to Otto. Ooh, we need to take vengeance for him. So therefore, he can't be a complete git.
Now, I've noticed that you've dropped the fourth and final name for this year as far as
Clang,
Emperors go. We're going to bring him in now. We're going to bring him in. So in much the same way that just as Otho was sort of coming into power, Vitellius was, in the background and coming forward, just as Vitellius is now triumphing over Otto, we've got this final character entering the fray, Vespasian, the man who no one thought would ever amount to much. He's definitely an outsider. He's been associated with the Julia Claudians for sure. I mean, he's been in Britain with Claudius and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but he's got an inglorious background.
Yeah, he's certainly not of that really elite character that you'd be maybe expecting to become the founder of the next dynasty to rule Rome. Certainly not the kind of character you'd imagine, building the Colosseum. And yet, so can you tell us a little bit about him?
Okay. I mean, don't get me started on Vespasian. I could kind of wax lyrical about Vespasian for many days. He is my absolute tip-top emperor. I love him a bit. I'd put him ahead of anybody. As you say, his background is pretty much non-existent. There's this brilliant bit at the start of the biography of Suetonius where he's desperately trying to account for where the hell this guy came from. And you get this, maybe his family is at some point connected with Hercules. And you just imagine Vespasian sitting there going, no, just seriously, stop. So yeah, he's had not a bad military career. As you say, he served with distinction under Claudius in Britain, but then his star wanes under Nero. He also wasn't that popular under Gaius. There's this famous story where Vespasian's an aedile in charge of the Roman roads, and Gaius steps into mud and it splatters up in his toga, so he just starts throwing mud at Vespasian, which the sources then turn around into this great omen that he was going to rule, which is look at him caring for the soil of Italy by having it slapped in his face. The problem is, even though he's not been popular under Nero, you can't deny that he's a bloody good military commander. And when the Judean rebellion breaks out in 66, Nero needs somebody he can send over there to put it down, and is going to do it competently and efficiently and everything else. So for the last 2-3 years, Vespasian's been out in Judea dealing with this pretty significant insurrection against the Roman way of rule. And in some ways that's really helped him, because he's just been out on the fringes, he's been forgotten about, he's been the kind of the also-ran figure of the period. But right from the beginning, I'd say, of 69, he starts doing his little political machination. So he sends his eldest son Titus back to Rome to swear fealty to Galba, who is killed en route, and then Titus goes, should I carry on to Rome? No, better turn round and tell Dad, and you get that fantastic moment where he goes for the oracle or they kind of jive. Vespasian's sitting there on the sidelines, watching all of this unfold, but he has the significant advantage of having a massive number of legions with him. So he's in command of 3 legions against Judea, but he's also got the support of one of the most interesting figures, I think, of this entire period, Mucianus, who's the governor of Syria, who's himself got 4 legions. Now, if Mucianus had wanted to, he could have really, been the fly in the ointment for everybody. But instead of wanting to be king, he becomes kingmaker and backs Vespasian. So now you've got Vespasian with 7 legions, plus the near legion that's sitting in Egypt, because Tiberius Julius Alexander, the governor of Egypt, he declares for Vespasian as well. So the eastern provinces form this kind of block to say, actually, Vespasian has got the potential to really upset the apple cart here and take over. And the way in which he presents himself is as this avenger of Otto, this restorer of liberty, this bringer back of order.
And this is, I think, the sort of the big narrative that Vespasian has to build for himself as well. So this year has to come to an end. Obviously, he doesn't know when he's in 69 how it's going to end up, but he's got to think about how he's going to play his cards. And that support network all through the East is a really fascinating way to build it, because everybody else is sort of playing around with everything up in Europe, being like, what about this? But it seems like actually that's a pittance in comparison to what you can draw out of the Eastern provinces. And so we're starting to see just what makes up the Roman world at this point in time. And Vespasian sort of seems to be the one who's got the diplomatic sort of outlook to build the alliances needed to do that push.
Yeah, the Eastern provinces give him so much, not just in terms of a power base, but also in terms of this fantastic advantage of distance. Anything that he does is at a remove from the urban centre. So if he has done things that are terrible, Romans probably wouldn't hear about it. But equally, it gives him that kind of mystique, and he really plays on that mystique. There's the fantastic Suetonius 11 of the biography of Vespasian, where it's just this list of omens, and a lot of them are to do with he went to the temple of Serapis in Alexandria and consulted with the god. He spat in the eyes of a blind man and restored him to sight. Almost kind of messianic levels of miracle working. And Vespasian really plays on that. And it allows him to create an imperial persona to invest into the Roman world before they actually meet him. It's great. You get coins minted in Rome for Vespasian in around about August, when he's still in Alexandria. So if you look at the portrait on the obverse, it doesn't look anything like him. But it's given this sense of, well, this is what the emperor must look like, because look at all of the miracles he's worked, and look at the diplomatic connections he's made, and look at the number of legions he commands. The fact is, he wins the war without actually having to lift a hand himself. He is doing everything at a remove, and also has the advantage of starving Rome by cutting off the Egyptian grain supply. Then when he restores it, it's then, look, Vespasian's come, and he's brought all of the grain.
Yeah, and the narrative of the importance of the grain supply to Rome cannot be underestimated. I mean, this is obviously something that has informed the narrative around Octavian, Augustus, and from the point at which they have a connection with Egypt, they begin to heavily rely on it as well and to exploit it. So for Vespasian to have Egypt is massive at this point in time.
Absolutely, totally. I mean, if you look at the criticisms that were levelled at the earlier emperors, the grain supply and the management or mismanagement of it is a great one. So you get the fact that Dio alleges that Gaius uses the boats from the Egyptian grain supply to build the bridge of boats at Baiae. When Claudius comes to power, you get sources, I think it's in the Seneca on benefits, where he says there's only 8 days grain supply. One of the first coins issued by Claudius is a Dipondius about the restoration of the grain supply. So yeah, you can't overestimate the fact that, you know, as Juvenal said, bread and circuses. Give the Roman people food and be that provider of food. They're going to love you.
So how does Vespasian win without lifting a finger, as you say?
He doesn't really have to lift a finger himself, because his seconds are so competent. Mucianus is leading the quote unquote invasion force across Europe. But there's also a kind of a tertiary element here, which is the Pannonian Moesian legions, who are kind of kicking themselves a bit, I suppose is the best way of putting this. They were desperate to come and help Otto, and came too late to help Otto. So you get the commanders of those legions and go, well, sod it, let's back Vespasian. We're close enough now. We know we don't like Vitellius. Vespasian's the better option. So you get a tertiary force, which is also technically Vespasianic, coming down into Italy as well. So now Vitellius is fighting against two different forces. He's already squandered so much money. I think that's something that's underestimated in a lot of accounts of 69, which is you've had, by this point, 6-7 months of civil war. Rome is poor now, especially given the fact that the richest provinces, the eastern provinces, are all basically now aligned with Vespasian. You've got Vitellius desperately trying to mint new money, lowering the precious metal content of the money to compensate. He's poor. He is cash poor, and you can't pay soldiers on promises. So even his most loyal lieutenants, Valens and Caecinus, start basically looking around going, Vitellius doesn't look like such a good option anymore. And they desert him. Now, both of them try to spin it as, we're going to try and raise the Cantabrian tribes to support. But actually, they just bugger off and desert him. And you end up at the end of December with the forces of the Pannonian Moesian legions arriving in Rome, and just, again, it's not really a set-piece battle so much as a series of skirmishes that lead up to it. Because by this point, you get the Vitellian faction in Rome and you get the Vespasianic faction in Rome, and there's fighting in the streets, and you get what Tacitus describes as the most disastrous thing to ever befall the Commonwealth, which is the destruction of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus up on the Capitoline. And it just, again, it kind of unravels very rapidly for Vitellius. You don't get a big set-piece confrontation. You get him almost kind of scurrying around the streets and desperately trying to get away. And there's a fantastic painting by, I think it's Lawrence Alma Tadema, which is The Fall of Vitellius. And it is like that, where the mob are just turned on him and are pelting him with rotten fruit and hunks of rock and things like that.
Not rotten fruit.
People ringing bells and shouting, shame, shame at him.
Well, yeah, because it does seem to be a bit of an ignoble finish for him.
Yeah,
he gets wounded and he eventually dies from the wounds, but it's not like he has a glorious death of any kind.
No, and again, I think that's very much presented as an end that befits him, a villainous end for a villainous figure, i.e., exactly what Vespasian needs to be the hero coming in to restore order.
And Vespasian does a really good job, I think, of not just setting that stage with that finish, but then also leaving the crowd wanting a little bit more, because he doesn't turn up for a while.
No, he does not turn up for a long time.
He's really waiting it out, I think.
Yeah, he is. And again, it's very cunning, because one thing I didn't mention, which was this kind of about how messed up 69 is that Vespasian's own brother is acting as city prefect for Vitellius. Vespasian's brother and Vespasian's youngest son, Domitian, are both in Rome, loosely attached to the Vitellian faction at this point. And in the aftermath of Vitellius' downfall, Mucianus arrives in Rome, and Domitian is in Rome and is being used as almost a kind of a Flavian figurehead to say, the emperor himself is in Alexandria dealing with, the problems of the grain supply and making sure Rome is well fed. Here is his youngest son, But it has the massive advantage of anything that's bad that needs to be done is not attached to Vespasian's own name. Mucianus takes the hit. Mucianus is described as this fantastic guy who really understands that what makes the sinews of government work is money. And that's what Rome needs. So Mucianus is going around basically acquiring funds in not particularly pleasant ways, but it allows Vespasian to just wash his hands of it. He's at a distance, he's over there accruing all of this kudos, accruing all this auctoritas, whilst the down and dirty work is being done by his seconds.
This seems like a fascinating relationship. I'm like, what's Mucianus getting out of this, I wonder, at this point?
I mean, it's an interesting question. It's one I can't really put my answer on hard and fast, because I think even the sources are confused about it. Tacitus certainly doesn't really say, well, clearly this is what Mucianus is getting. The way in which it's often used has been said it's analogous to Augustus with Maecenas, in the sense that the great assistant, that was enough for Mucianus. I think you've got to say that possibly Mucianus has a murky enough past, and the sources do allude to a murky enough past, that means that he wouldn't be able to come to the throne without some degree of philosophical opposition. Vespasian has the advantage of being that unknown guy who's built an imperial persona for himself, and it's actually a really good persona. However much it's not grounded in reality.
But that's okay. He's going to make good on that. He's going to bring something to life when he gets
and then
there.
with the mopping up, obviously, of affairs, in Judea and all that kind of stuff, they've got the money flowing in from that campaign, which, of course, helps to fund the building of public works, most notably on areas of the cities that Nero had commandeered for himself, very wisely, of course, in the aftermath of the Great Fire. And so, he does a spectacular job in setting himself up for success. And he does. I mean, he's in power for the next 10 years. He, dies in his bed. His sons succeed him. They have mixed successes, but nonetheless, they're there as a dynasty.
Yeah, and the word dynasty is another important factor. I mean, they are presented from day one as a dynasty. You get those aurae of 69-70 where it's Vespasian on one side and on the reverse, Titus and Domitian. They are I think the key thing that that Vespasian brings, that the Roman word is craving, is stability. In the same way that Augustus did. After that century of late Republican civil unrest, Augustus comes in with, I'm better than the alternative. Same with Vespasian. He's better than the alternative, because you've had 9 months of chaos, carnage, and realistically, for the first time, Roman armies plundering Romans for money and food and everything else. So when Vespasian comes, and he comes with this idea of restoration, and I'm doing things in the manner of Augustus, Tiberius, and Claudius, I mean, he produces the Lex de Imperio to basically say, these are the powers of the emperor, and they're everything that the best 3 emperors we've had so far did. So, it's a remarkable way of him being able to level the playing field and say, we're hitting reset, stability now.
Yeah, well, you're right, because obviously for a long time when people had been, talking about, wow, Caligula's really an asshole, I wonder what we could do about that. Oh, wait, we don't want to get rid of the imperial system because the alternative is civil war. Well, there was a little bit of truth to that, obviously, in that that's exactly what they got when Nero was no more. And after the reality of that, because it's been a while since, anyone's actually had to live through that. The reality of that is probably enough to make them go, yeah, we were right to be afraid of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's why the only significant opposition Vespasian really gets is that kind of, or the stoic opposition with people like Thrasea Paetus and Helvidius Priscus.
It doesn't really last very long. I mean, that does get squashed out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, and in a way he has to deal with that because he's competing with a legacy that he doesn't have. He has to build it from scratch. So there's always going to be, I think, a philosophical opposition to his rule because he doesn't come from the right kind of family, really. And despite all the story and myth building that's been conducted up until now, he's really got to pull through. And so we see him hold the consulship over and over again because he's got to really build his reputation from the ground up in certain respects.
Absolutely. And the consulship, obviously, that is that significant Republican power. And it gives him that Republican veneer, that facade that Augustus had tried to maintain. But also, I think it's the fact you've got to remember he's doing things like he is promoting and electing a load of new men into the Senate. He wants to make the Senate, or at least on the face of it, a functional body again. So that's why Tacitus becomes a senator. Tacitus himself is adlected in by Vespasian.
That's kind of 69, I feel.
It is
like.
69, so we just have a couple of questions to finish up with, which we would love your opinion on. So I think I know the answer to this after our discussion, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You could hang out with any of the 4 emperors from the long year. Who would it be?
Definitely not Galba. I know you'd get a good meal with Vitellius, but it's got to be Vespasian. It has to be. I mean, I think the key thing I like about him so much is he knows that he's playing a game. You get these fantastic remarks. I mean, he is generally quoted as having a great sense of humour. We know the famous stories about, oh, here's a coin. Titus, does it smell of urine? No. Well, funny, it came from the public urinals. Ha ha ha. Yeah. You get that. You get the fact that he makes jokes even on his own deathbed. I am becoming a god. He knows the difference between person and persona. And he's got that kind of that down to earth quality about him. Almost, I don't want to use the word, but avuncular. He's got that kind of avuncular quality to him. So yeah, it's got to be Vespasian.
Fair enough. Dr. G, who's your pick?
Oh, look, I really want to hang out with Otho.
Me too! Yeah.
Mostly because he's the youngest of the crew. And I feel like, we're of an age, we'd probably have a good conversation about, where we're at the stage of life. I obviously haven't been quite as successful as Otho, but I also don't feel like I'm going to come to such a tragic end. I feel like there's some things to be exchanged there. I know I would not enjoy a conversation with Galba. He is an arch conservative, and that is a very different type of politics to the one I engage in. But I feel like on the balance, Vitellius and Otho might offer interesting conversation.
I feel like if Otho can even be a pretend husband to Poppaea Sabina, I'm interested, All right, and finally, our final question is, if you had to cast this movie, which of course we're all going to write together now via long distance.
We're going to bring it to the big screen. This is where it needs to go.
Yeah, exactly. Who do you think you would cast as the 4 emperors of 69?
I did think about this one a little bit, because, when you talked about it, it's kind of, who should it be? Galba, I thought, was the easiest one to cast, because you want somebody who's kind of dour, stern, stone-faced. So I came up with a couple for Galba. Now, one of them is the fantastic lead actor from Babe, James Cromwell. So he's got that presence, he's got that kind of imposing visage.
That sense of severity.
Yeah, that ability to, and also just that presence. Otto, and forgive me, but Otto was purely on a look-alike from the bust in the Uffizi. Jonah Hill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just exactly the same face shape, and I think we can get the hair looking pretty much exactly the same. And then, I don't know, for Vespasian, again, you'd want somebody who's got that kind of lived-in face look. I don't know. So I was thinking, who's having a bit of a resurgence at the minute? John Goodman. Who obviously, kind of big films of recent things like Kong Skull Island, that kind of thing. He's got that presence, he's got that kind of gravelly lived-in face, something like that. Or you could go really kind of arcane and cast somebody who's already got 2 sons in an acting dynasty, like the Sarsgaards and things like that. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a few options in there.
Nice.
Possibilities.
Well, I will tell you who I came up with. I thought of Harrison Ford for Galba if he could put on a British accent, because we all know that the Romans speak with British accent.
Absolute RP accent. Yeah, definitely.
And I was actually going to go for someone. I know that the statue we have of supposedly of Otto is not particularly physically appealing. Yeah. Really, yeah. But I have to admit, I was going to go for Nicholas Hoult, because I have been watching him in The Great, and I could kind of see him capturing that playboy, essence to him.
This is where my Henry Cavill comes into his own.
Oh.
Because he's the bad boy.
We are dreaming now. And finally, I was going to, we were talking about the film Caligula, which is horrifying. But it suddenly made me think that for Vitellius, I think that Malcolm McDowell could be really good.
You might have to wear some kind of padding, but yeah, I mean.
I don't know. I don't know if you've seen him lately, but he is starting to fill out a bit, in his latter years. So,
I was searching for an actor that I felt like gave a bit of humour to the Vespasian, so I was going to go with casting Stanley Tucci.
Ooh, interesting.
Because I feel like he's really come into his own in lockdown, and I was like, oh, that might work.
He
really
does have a
nicely.
great sense of humour. He does have a great
and he
sense
does
of
have a
humour.
presence.
Yeah.
And I feel like he could pull off a Vespasian.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. We'll be in touch, of course, about the movie script and the casting. We've got to get some offers out, obviously, Yeah.
Got to write the screenplay.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll be in touch. But thank you so much.
No, thank you, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
We hope that you enjoyed this special edition of The Partial Historians. We would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our Patreons for their invaluable support and to make a quick announcement. Starting in 2021, our Patreons will be granted exclusive early access to our bonus episodes. We hope that this helps you to enjoy the celebrations of the Saturnalia, and we'll see you all again in the month of Janus.